and we talked about yesterday that saying, oh, the concussion's another example of him being injury prone, I think is an absurd statement. What is a fair statement is the play on which he got injured was another play where Carson Wentz went all for it, which is the way he is wired. He is running, he is going to be physical, and he's going to go head first when he can. Now, it is not his fault at all he got concussed. I want to be very clear on that because I said it yesterday. I will say it again. But you do have a level of concern with Wentz. That is, he wired in such a way, so competitive, and such a big, strong, physical guy who, by the way, maybe one of the negatives of playing Division II college football, or FCS is what they call it now, I guess, is that you don't have as many guys who can really punish you when you are trying to get the extra yard, make the extra play, because you don't have as many super high-level athletes that you have if you played Division I, if you played in the SEC, certainly in the NFL. That's a question. And the other one is one that we're going to have to wait and see, which is, can he win over a locker room for the entirety of a season the way he seemed to struggle with this year until the very end of the year when some of those bigger personalities and more veteran receivers got injured and their voices were removed from the locker room? Those questions remain. Brian, I've never questioned his talent. I've never questioned his toughness, even though he's gotten dinged a bunch. I think part of the toughness has led to the injuries. And I've never questioned his ability at his best to be almost as good as anyone in football. But those two questions to me about long-term durability and about the non-football part of being a quarterback still remain.
First of all, never question the FCS school. I went to a 1AA school myself, so let's start there. But I think Carson showed something towards the end of the season, the last quarter of the season, that, to your point, he didn't have those personalities, didn't have Deshaun, didn't have Nelson Aguilar, didn't have Alshon Jeffrey in the locker room. But he showed that even with lesser talent, he could be that force multiplier that Coach Mangini is always talking about, taking young talent that was unproven and making those guys look much better than they probably were. He also has showed that he could be a leader, even though it was in a small sample. So my biggest question is, can he do it for an entire season? Can you do that? I'm not worried about his health. I'm not worried about him getting hurt again. I think that play in the playoffs, I want my quarterback to go, all out in the playoffs. And so if you were ever going to make that play that he got hurt on, that's the time to do it, when everything is on the line, when we were playing in the playoffs. And so I just think that Carson has to show the consistency that he can do it all season long.
Didn't he just do it all season long?
Well, no, he stayed healthy all season long, but there were some games where he just didn't play great. There were some games where he had a good fourth quarter, a good second half, but he didn't play good 4 quarters. In these last quarter of games, even though they won them all, even though he played well, the Cowboys game was the only game that he played well for 4 quarters.
Right, it was bad in the Giants game for the first 3 quarters, right. And you could argue he was bad more often than good the first 3 quarters of the season, when en route to them being 5 and 7. It wasn't just injuries and bad defense. Wentz had a fumbling problem and a turnover problem early in the season, which is, I think, what you're talking about.
Well, he produced, and that's what you want. He's still a young quarterback. I mean, he missed a lot of the portions of the season in his first 3 years and really the last 2 years, but he has to continue to prove that he can consistently do it. If he can do that, then I think he'll be absolutely fine. He has all the tools that you want. He's big, he's strong, he can make all the throws, he's athletic. He just has to be smarter in some of his decision-making.
The only question that I have about Carson Wentz is, can he win in the playoffs? Because we haven't seen it. And unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to witness it this past weekend because he got injured. Now, as far as everything else, we can talk about his leadership. We can talk about his ability to throw the football, what he does as far as size, all these things. He checks the box. Like, we talk about his leadership and winning over the locker room. Well, when you have personalities that are going to kind of conflict with one another, you're going to always have issues with one being kind of the alpha male and then another wanting to be the alpha male, but you're just not. And so when things aren't going your way, that's when you have to have a guy like Carson Wentz, typically your quarterback, that's going to say, this is how things are. And it wasn't as if he was leading them down the wrong path. He wants the same thing. He wants it probably, if not more than anyone in that locker room, because he didn't really get a chance to experience a Super Bowl run. And so when I say the only question I have for Carson Wentz, can you win in the playoffs? Because he hasn't had the opportunity. You alluded to it. In December, he played pretty much playoff football.
Games. Yep.
I don't care who the opponent was. His expectation was to win, and he got it done.
But that is where the one asterisk goes alongside it. In addition to the fact that they weren't technically playoff games, they weren't playoff caliber opponents. So you won 4 consecutive games that were the same stakes as the playoffs,
Correct.
which is if you lose, your season's over. But the other reason people talk about playoff games and a team and a quarterback's playoff record as if the only thing that's different in the playoffs is the pressure and the stakes. The other thing that's different is the quality of competition. Every game you're playing is against a good or great football team. That's the other element of it, which is why it's why the injury in the Seahawks game was so unfortunate, because you're against an excellent team, a Hall of Fame quarterback, a great coach, a team that's been there before, and he got a half dozen snaps before he got knocked out of a football game he desperately wanted to go back into.
All right, we're going to take a break. Brian, stick around. Coming up, to the Dallas Cowboys make...
Mike McCarthy's going to have a huge impact on Dak Prescott. Early and often, he's going to bring him in. He's going to make sure that he's a part of everything offensive moving forward. And that's what he did with Brett Favre. That's what he did with Aaron Rodgers. Despite what we hear about the offense growing stale and the rifts, Aaron always had a say in what was going to be the game plan and what he liked and did not like leading up into the week of practice. That will be Dak Prescott. Mike McCarthy is in every meeting. He's very hands-on. He understands how to get the most out of his quarterbacks, young quarterbacks. One of the things that he doesn't get a lot of credit for, because the defenses weren't good, but he made sure that Aaron was exposed to all defensive fronts. The 4-3 with Bob Sanders, the 3-4 with Dom Capers at young ages, so Aaron could understand this is what you're going to see in this league.
You're talking about in practice.
In practices.
Okay.
This is what you're going to see. Throw everything at him. Make sure he sees it all so that he can have a quicker learning curve, and his reaction in the games is that much quicker in response to what he sees, because I saw it in practice. That was one thing that I noticed about Mike McCarthy in myself. We saw everything. He made sure he threw everything at us to where we were prepared and we were understanding what was going to be shown to us as offensive guys looking at the defense, so that we can play and react versus thinking and then reacting.
So the one, I think all that's incredibly valuable information and insightful. One thing I'll add to it is Aaron Rodgers really thrived at getting to the line of scrimmage, seeing what's going on, and being empowered to make his own calls, right? Being able to call checks, being able to see what's happening there. One spot where Dak really impressed me this year, even though I'm somewhat of a Dak skeptic, is when we saw him get to the line, realize, oh, they cannot guard the seam here. They are not prepared for me to check to a run here. He did it not very often, but somewhat often this year, and when you saw him do it, it was incredibly successful. I think he will be empowered to do that more under Mike McCarthy, assuming the McCarthy-Kellen Moore situation is ironed out. There's a little, I would say, uncertainty about, is Kellen Moore staying? If so, who's going to be calling plays? I'm sure McCarthy and Jerry Jones have discussed that, just hasn't been reported out fully. Here's my concern for McCarthy with Dak. Greg, I'll ask you, because you've been a rich guy for a very long time. You ever had a very, very fast car? I don't know if you're a car guy.
I have.
You have? Okay. While you owned that car, did you ever own a different car or drive a different car that wasn't the same juice to it?
I did.
Because it feels very different. You get in it, you hit the gas, you're like, oh, this is a totally different situation.
This is not the car that I'm accustomed
Mike
to
McCarthy has coached what 2 quarterbacks in this league?
Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers.
Maybe the 2 best arms in the history of football. Certainly on the list. They're on the Mount Rushmore of it, along with Dan Marino, Patrick Mahomes, probably going to be on there. Dak Prescott has a lot of really good qualities. Elite arm talent, not one of them.